Hello, this is Dr. Still again. I wanted to just spend a few minutes and go over something that I think is kind of neat. I just want to share it with you. But it's in keeping with the idea of being with God and being with others in the counseling arena. And what does that really mean? What does that look like? And I have a couple of illustrations that I think are worthy of sharing with you. And I want to start off with just asking you to think for a moment, how do you pray? And if you're like most people, when you pray, you basically have a list of things that you ask God for. You have a list of requests. We pray and ask for God's healing for people who are sick. When we have a crisis, we ask God to be with us and to get us through the crisis. If somebody is going through an issue, most of the time we ask God to take away whatever the problem is. But it's really interesting to think about how we pray. And when we think about how we pray, then we have to think about who is God to us based on how we pray, because there is a direct correlation. And as I have gone through my own personal journey with God through the years, I have been struck by the way that I pray and other people pray, and I've been struck with a different way of being with God, a different way of being in relationship with God, and it's had a significant impact on the way that I pray. So I want to go over an illustration that you can find in Skye Jethani's book called With. And this diagram is actually something that's in his book, but he goes over the various ways that we are in relationship with God. And that the goal, of course, is the centerpiece here, that is with God. However, we are going to find ourselves, and for good reasons, in a position where we, as he would describe, be over God, for God, under God, and from God. So I want to just go over these different areas with you and give you some illustrations and just some things for you to think about. So the first one that I'm going to go over is what he calls life from God. And this is going to be illustrated by the health and wealth preaching that you probably are familiar with. And the idea is that we have these certain expectations of God. And it's almost as if God is a genie, and we're asking God to fulfill our requests, to fulfill our expectations. We want all of the gifts that he has for us. And as I mentioned before, all of these different areas that Skye Jethani talks about, they're all pertinent and they're all important, but we cannot be in that area of relationship with God apart from having a complete and balanced relationship with him. And so if this is an individual's relationship with God, it's going to be very imbalanced. It's going to not result in the, transformation process that God desires for us all to be in. So the next area that I'm going to talk about is life over God. Now this position we'll all find ourselves in, because basically what this position describes is a sense of, okay, God, your word, the Bible, is a book of principles, and I want to understand these principles. And as I understand these mysteries and knowledge of your word, then I'll be able to put them into practice, and then I will be basically successful. And so, we have Saddleback Church and Rick Warren, and he's put out the purpose-driven life, and he's we got others who put put out 7 effective principles for church growth. And, as a leader in the church, you want to take these principles and these teachings and you want to apply them, and you want to do, you want the church to be successful. And so again, it's not a bad thing if it's used with everything else that God has given us in order to grow the church, which is basically the people in the church, and not grow the church in the sense of looking at numbers and that being the goal. Okay, the next principle that I'm going to talk about is going to be life under God. And this is a very primitive idea in the sense that you have religions all over the world who are practicing this, and in the terms of making sacrifices to their God or bringing gifts to their God, and if they do that, God's going to bless them. And so it's a sense of, I'm going to do this for you, God, and then, I'm going to have this expectation that you're going to bless me and you're not going to curse me. And, we see in the Old Testament, how this is described in terms of tithing, first fruits. It is a way of bringing, worship to God, honoring God. But it's the sense that all I have to do is obey God, and that equals that He has to bless me. And so, again, it's a strict obedience to the, rituals and the rules, as you saw the Pharisees and the Sadducees doing when Jesus came into the scene. And He was talking to them, and He says, it's so much greater, so much bigger than that. Would you listen to me? Okay, and then this last area is going to be life for God. And this is, again, it's a very honorable position to hold, where you see yourself as a servant, as Jesus was a servant. You see yourself as somebody who's on mission for God. You see yourself as being called out, and God's given you, that calling, and you want to accomplish great things for God's service. But, even on the mission field, we had instances where new missionaries would come to Europe, and, they landed on the field, and they were ready to, do great and mighty things for God. And, it always struck us as, what, we just need you to learn the language first. That's what we're asking you to do. But, there's a sense that, if God's called you to be a missionary, then He's called you to great and wonderful things, which is so true. But we got to determine what God considers to be those great and wonderful things, and not make that determination on our own. And then the center here is life with God. And that's basically what all of these other areas should point to. And basically, this is where everything's going to solidify. And life with God is found in the Trinity. In John 1:1, we see that the Word was with God. And we know that the Word was Jesus. We see that, the Trinity, there was a communion, there was connection, there was a relationship, and how God desires to have that with us. He desires to have that we have it with other people. So our focus is going to be God. It's not going to be our accomplishments. It's not going to be basically our blessings. It's not going to be our obedience. It's not going to be the principles that we use. It's going to be that we are pursuing God. We're pursuing that relationship. That is the main thing, and all of these other things are going to come out of that. And so we have to make our relationship with God, Jesus Christ, our treasure. So rather than the goal being all these other things that we ask for, our goal should be God. And I wanted to share with you something that was written in Skye Jethani's book, if you haven't ever heard it before. But Dan Rather, he's a newscaster, and he did an interview with Mother Teresa. And he asked her, he says, "What do you say to God when you pray?" And Mother Teresa answered, and she said, "I don't say anything." And then she went on to say, I listen. And then she said, God doesn't say anything. He listens. And Dan Rather was very, very confused, perplexed at that answer. And she went on to say, if you don't understand that, then I can't explain it to you. So we have to be in complete surrender to God. And that means that we have to try to catch a glimpse of His truth, who He is, what He has for us, rather than coming to Him with an attitude of, by the way, if you didn't know, let me share with you what I need. And so there's got to be this balance. Yes, we are to pray for the sick. And yes, God will bring healing. And yes, He does want us to be obedient. And yes, He does want us to use the principles. But we've got to do so much more than that. So I think it begins with that idea of, God, you're in control. I am, basically the pot. You are the potter. You need to mold me and make me. And I need to listen. And I need to pay attention to what you're saying to me as I read the Bible, as I meditate, as I'm in fellowship with others, as I pray, and that we need to spend probably a little bit more time listening than speaking. Same thing in the counseling room. We obviously, and it would be to our benefit to spend more time listening than it is talking. So anyway, I find his work fits in with who we are as ministers. I hope you will find this helpful. And I will sign off.